This evening we have one item, discussion item for our zoning ordinance workshop. Thank you all for this joint meeting. Should be a great discussion. Are there any edits to the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as presented. Second.
Motion by Polika, second by Hagfors. So roll call for each motion. Gotcha. All those in favor? Aye. Agenda is approved. Next, we have a call to audience, and this is a moment on our agenda where anyone from the public has the ability to speak on items that are not on our agenda. So if there's anyone who would like to speak now from the audience, you can go to the microphone.
Thank you. My name's Timothy Risk. I live at 541 West Hazelhurst Street. This past summer, my wife and I had a lot of family visiting from out of town, and an elder member had a medical emergency last month. And I just wanted to let you all know that Ferndale police and fire response was phenomenal. My wife's a nurse. She deals with a lot of emergent and acute cases with patients, and she was super impressed. I figured I'd eventually get to a meeting to let you all know. But on a related note, speaking of elder care, I saw the ADUs were on the agenda, and let you know that we're enthusiastic about the potential for zoning. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to our discussion item. And for our zoning ordinance workshop, I am going to hand the workshop over to Andrew Lippman, our consultant of McKenna, who's helping us with our zoning ordinance.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, council members, and commissioners. It's great to all be together tonight. I'm Andrew Lippman. This is Mara Brostowski. Okay, I tried. Yeah, we're both senior planners at McKenna. Tonight, hold on one second. If I can get to the, there we go. Second, okay. Yeah, tonight we want to quickly go over some project updates and then take a deep dive into our draft zoning map, which show our proposed districts and also our land use table. And finally, time permitting, we want to discuss an overlay district we're considering and nonconformities. So first, just an overview, where have we been, where are we now, and where are we going? So we had our kickoff in June. We did a diagnostic review of your current ordinance in July, 1 month later. During July and August, we've had our, been doing our public engagement workshops. Next month, we will have a first draft of our zoning ordinance done. Then the final draft of the ordinance is projected for January. So then we would be going through the public hearings and adoption in January and February. In terms of public engagement, we've had 4 engagement workshops throughout the summer, and they've been all well attended. Our housing diversity, downtown design, equity, and sustainability. We've received a lot of helpful feedback, which we'll point out throughout this presentation. And we will have summaries of all the events posted online by the end of the month. And you have in your packets summaries of the first 2, the housing diversity and the downtown design events. Also, we're continuing to receive feedback online. and the online surveys will remain open for at least another month, probably longer than that. And all of this feedback is being used to guide the rewrite. The number of people who've responded so far online, we've had 33 for the downtown design survey, 22 for housing diversity, 10 for racial equity, and we're still aggregating the results for the most recent one on environmental sustainability. So far, 2 items that respondents have ranked as the highest priorities are, one, requiring greater human scale in the design of buildings. Actually, 79% of the respondents consider that to be a high priority, and also requiring green infrastructure for new developments, such as permeable pavers and solar power. And 73% of the respondents consider that to be a high priority. Also, and Roger wants to speak to this, the city plans to send out letters to residents, which you can talk about.
I just want to go over a couple of handouts we passed out. The first one is this one that has a QR code to the 4 engagement sessions. So I think, as Andrew mentioned, we did get a pretty good response over this period at the 4 engagement sessions. We always want to seek out more. So I think one of the things we're going to do, we talked about, was sending out 500 letters to residents asking them to participate as well, to see if that can garner some more information. So on this exhibit, you'll see the cities divided up into 4 quadrants. Our quadrants have different amounts of housing in each one. So we want to treat each one equally. So what we figured out is the total number of housing units in the city of 8,873, which would have us sending 170 letters to the northeast quadrant, 55 to the northwest, 110 to the southeast, and 165 to the southwest. So we hope by the end of the week we can send out 500 additional letters asking residents to participate in this, and that'll get a little more feedback. The last thing I'll point out is we also gave you a sheet that has some basic words on it. This is to keep track as you're discussing any notes you want to take that'll help you remember. So questions for McKenna or staff, questions on what we're going to talk about, but also what's important is that at the end it says anything that you want to discuss. If there's notes you want to take about code changes you'd like to see, not like to see, any touch points to talk about, that gives you that opportunity. So I'll turn it.
Chair, are you holding off questions till later?
What's the question?
Well, through this survey, are we going to be able to track who responds, like which quadrant, or is it completely anonymous?
I'm going to speak. I don't think it tracks. I don't think, well, because it's going to send you to that specific thing, which is part of that is not a question. But if we send it out proportionally based on our residential units, we felt like that would give each quadrant a weight to equalize it. We can talk about if we could put a box that you could check where you're from. We can talk about it offline.
It'd be interesting to know the results of who responds more, because I think you're going to probably get more response out of Northwest than you might out of Southwest.
Mm-hmm. We can look at it.
I just want to thank staff for doing this and going an extra step to provide this survey in a mailed response. I know it's extra work for staff. I did have one question. I believe I already know the answer, but with these, the number of letters or the location of letters where they're going to be randomized to who those are going to.
Yeah, we will. So Excel has a function that you can randomize select that. So we'll just tell it, we have a sheet for northeast, northwest, southwest. We'll just give it a command to select 70 or whatever the number is in that. It'll randomly select it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm.
I've been asking for randomized surveys for a long time, so thank you.
Thanks, Roger. All right, so now let's turn to the proposed zoning map that you should all have in your packets. So we're proposing 8 different zoning districts, and we'll go over each one one by one. As you'll see, some of these districts are conventional, or based on conventional zoning, and some other districts are form-based code. which is also consistent with what you have now in certain districts being conventional and others being form-based code. How we created the draft, there were several inputs or several factors. First of all, of course, we looked at the future land use map in your recently adopted Plan Ferndale. Also, we met with the steering committee 4 times, had some rather long constructive meetings. We've had several meetings with the administration throughout this process, and then, of course, our public engagement, which we just went through. So, I'm going to start with our residential districts. We have R1 and R2. A lot of R1, or what we're proposing now as the new R1, encompasses your existing R1 and R2, and then a lot of the new proposed R2 encompasses the existing R3 and R4. But for the R1, the intent statement, which we propose to put in the ordinance, is that the R1 district allows for a mix of detached single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and accessory dwelling units to create cohesive, walkable neighborhoods. The R1 district also permits neighborhood-serving amenities and services such as religious institutions, park and recreation, government facilities, schools, and other institutional uses. The R1 district provides for tree-lined streets, native landscaping, and homes designed to facilitate social interaction, such as garages located to the side of the home or to the rear of the property. Land uses that generate excessive traffic on local streets are discouraged. The R1 district prioritizes pedestrian activity via traffic calming infrastructure and slow zones, as well as shared rights-of-way. And I want us to discuss these intent statements, starting with this one, but we wanted to share these intent statements because we got the feeling like that's something that you wanted to put a lot of emphasis in with this new code. Yes.
Sorry, if I might just iterate on that. Just for the city council, and apologies if you've already heard this through other presentations, but that is something that the Planning Commission asked for, is to really focus on intent statements and adding them throughout the ordinance. One of the benefits of having the intent statement is that it gives a better general picture that the layman can understand better than a lot of the zoning ordinance. And so one thing that we find at the Planning Commission, and I'm sure you've seen at the City Council when something comes to you from the Planning Commission, is we might have to interpret what the zoning ordinance says sometimes. And even though we're all involved in this process, we might not know what's going on now. In 5 to 8 years, when this is still the ordinance, folks might not understand where did that come from. And so having these intent statements really helps paint that story of what do they mean by this. So what is the intention of this zone? And so these statements here are for the specific different zones. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone is kind of understanding like the importance of these and how it will be helpful down the road for all of us.
Thank you. Oh, just emailing the presentation. Yeah.
All right, sorry to.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, I wanted to read that and then open it up to some thoughts so we could reflect and hear your feedback. Yes, Mayor?
What was the thought process around fourplexes and R2? Given that there are a lot of fourplexes in West Ferndale?
Oh, okay. I think, and we can look at that if that's something that you think we should look at, but generally just the R2, we thought maybe fourplexes should be there because of the denser residential units. But, okay, we can look at that.
They're integrated.
Okay,
It's a land use that's already
right,
grandfathered in and existing.
okay. Well, maybe that was an oversight then, or a
I
typo.
just wanted to
So
point
we'll
out
do that.
that there's also the use table provided with the zoning map, and so even though it's not directly in the intent statement, the fourplex is a permitted use in R1 with additional use standards. And so it might just be that
Yeah,
it wasn't spelled out in the intent statement, and maybe we do want it to. I just want to,
I just would like to have crossover. Isn't? So
yeah,
I wanna
no, that's a good point.
sure,
In an application, you allow it here and not there, and then the planning.
of course, yeah.
Before we go on, I'm going to print some. Anybody want to print the copy? I've been paid.
Oh.
All right, I'll print a bunch. Give me a minute.
And then, sorry, I have another question.
Of course.
With the opening statement that you have specific clear. That doesn't seem specific. For interpretation and applicants, if that
Okay.
is. I don't know what. That could be subjective
Okay,
rather than objective.
okay.
Specifically the word excessive, or because I think uses could potentially change, but
Well, if low density is just allowing single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, then you don't need a statement about it. Because they're not allowed.
Oh, but you have schools. Most of your R1s and R2s, you have schools. And they change use. For example, if you look at university, that was closed for a long time, and all of a sudden it's being utilized again, and that increase in traffic occurred, which really we had no control over. So people just have to be aware that depending on that, other uses within the neighborhood, the amount of traffic may change.
Yeah, but if it's a school, we're never gonna have control over it. We have no control over what they do. So our zoning saying that just to accommodate schools, if that statement was left in just. I have a commentary on that. Yes, I have a little bit more progressive view that, and I understand and I want to front, I know traffic is variety of things. Dearth of childcare facilities in Ferndale, over prioritizing traffic. I'm not sure that is a value statement that our zoning should reinforce. So zoning for childcare uses was a thing that came to council prior years to allow more childcare, more children per house. But state law has changed. Allow more children per house. Nothing to do with traffic anymore, even though zoning was designed to handle traffic. Right? So we're picking cars over childcare.
So,
Specific incidents when we use this statement.
To the chair to phrase it as the question as what McKenna was envisioning a land use that would generate excessive traffic that we're trying to discourage would be, and to specifically target that use rather than traffic in general.
I feel like.
or, So would you be in favor of us just eliminating that one sentence?
I think so.
Okay,
So maybe more about what we want versus what we don't want.
it's a good
Makes
point.
sense.
I like that, yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, obviously, we're allowing ADUs here, as in many other districts. I just wanted to point out that it was great to see that there was widespread acceptance of ADUs throughout all of our public engagement. For example, online, the vast majority of respondents believe that ADUs should be permitted in what is now in both the traditional residential future land use area and the urban residential area. Actually, 91% of respondents said that they would be in favor of ADUs in what is now the traditional residential future land use area, and 67% said that they would also be in favor of ADUs being permitted in urban residential area. And also that incentives should be given for renting to low-income households. Okay. So that's the R1 district. Sorry. Sorry. I believe that that's referring to like bike lanes and lanes for, cars. Correct, yeah. Yeah.
Stating garages located to the side of the home. Garages located at the rear.
Okay.
Ideally, I think we're like down. Position on the side of the home.
Okay.
So I would remove that if we're saying what we want. Garages located at the.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to the next district so we can cover everything. The R2 district allows for a mix of denser residential uses, such as townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, live-work units, apartment buildings, ADUs, and all other uses permitted in the R1 district. The R2 district primarily encompasses neighborhoods surrounding the downtown core and serves as a buffer or transition zone between non-residential and low-density residential uses. The R2 district prioritizes pedestrian activity via traffic calming infrastructure and slow zones, painted mid-block crossings, and separated bike lanes.
My first comment would be that I would prefer commercial to non-residential, as we have residential in our commercials. I believe that's really the intent, right? That you're talking about between the commercial versus low density?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, that's good.
Yep.
Just want to make sure we're kind of understood.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. So also, if we look at the borders, the proposed borders here of the R2, it stretches north to East Lewiston and Camborne, west to Livernois, east to Hilton and the train tracks, and south to Ardmore and Hazelhurst. So I would like to get some feedback on those borders, and if you agree with those borders. Yes?
Possible to buffer or transition? I know it's a buffer between zone, right, which is, but it's written as if it's a buffer from
maybe something more like focusing greater density, closer to services and modes of transportation, or something like that?
I'm not so worried about the buffer. Central business district. Oni, we're R2.
Mhm.
We're saying that we're fourplexes in R1. Starting to allowing these future types of and so that is number one. Number two, last sentence of R1 and R2 pedestrian activity.
Mhm.
R2 talks about something, but Pinecrest is R1 and there's bike lanes all along.
Yep.
And so those sentences need,
Yep.
otherwise we out Pinecrest.
Yep.
Options of, maybe just call it traffic calming infrastructure.
Yep.
Each street chooses.
Okay.
I don't think we need. I guess it's inconsistent.
Because of the location along like 10 Mile and,
Yeah, it's not the rest of 9 Mile or the mixed use corridor. But if you look at all the west 9 Mile and east, one can surmise that would apply well, but we're not. But if you go into those side streets down East 9 Mile and West 9 Mile, there are apartments outside of front-facing East 9 Mile. I think it's less condensed, but more spotty, right?
Yeah.
But they're there.
Yep.
Through the chair, I guess I am sort of curious why there's not more along Woodward. From my perspective, like that would be a natural fit for people who utilize public transit, have a little bit more density across the entire span of Woodward, but I'm not sure balance to that that's already been considered.
I will say that this is largely based off our existing zoning ordinance, or zoning map rather. And we had 4 residential districts before, we consolidated them into 2. And so really, this is just mimicking like the locations of those zones. The uses were changing a bit, but it's really just mimicking our existing ordinance. So I think though that if we think we should change that, this is obviously not the time. So I just wanted to point out, and maybe Angie, you can elaborate on what would be the differences between the R1 and 2. Obviously, density is one of them. I do notice in the use schedule that there's just a few differences, mostly in density. So such as like a cemetery, which has a very low density, that would be the R1 versus R2. Of course, it's a special land use, even in the R1. And then there's the larger foster care group home, larger adult foster care group home.
Mhm.
And then a multifamily dwelling that's permitted in R2. Same with those higher density group care homes.
Yep.
So just as conversation, there's very slight differences that we're detailing in the uses, but sorry, I don't recall which ones you were identifying as form-based versus traditional.
Well, so both of these residential districts are conventional.
Okay. So that's not, there wouldn't be, as you're supposing, major differences in like a form between the two. It's more so just in the density. Okay. So if there are any suggestions on changing how the map looks, or even maybe the potential to combine them, but then make more dense uses, special land uses, that could be an option. There's a couple different options that we could discuss if we're not happily consistent with, how the two districts are laid out.
My suggestion would just, do R2, one block, one road in, like Withington along West 9 Mile, are duplexes and fourplexes on that street, not just single-family homes. You're looking to create more of a transition zone
Sure.
from the mixed use, PD, corridor mixed use. I would just bump up the color to R2 into
Okay.
yeah, I'm just saying, just bring the R2, one or two streets up, because there seems to be more duplexes side by side. There's just more than one type of housing in that city.
Sure. So, Mayor, oh, sorry. We're probably going to say the same thing. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to point out, though, that, so the R1 isn't just a single-family zone, right? So we're still allowing a lot of different housing typologies in that R1, including duplexes and triplexes. Was that what you were going to point out, Mark? Or something else?
Chair. And Mayor, thank you for your comments.
Where were you directing on your attention?
North of
Just like outside the purple borders along 9 Mile.
Yeah.
Okay, north and south of
Extend
9
the
Mile.
R2 along the purple borders on each side of East 9 Mile. That makes sense. Just something to look at.
I think Councilwoman Bruner James had a good point as well, as along Woodward, identifying that obviously there's the commercial corridor, and that's what the red, pink, and purple are. But are you thinking about outside of that, then being another area that would serve as a R2?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to sort of be that block by block, because there's no parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Just my thinking is that public transit corridors and
Yeah, I was going to point that out. So those districts are mixed-use districts, which Mara's actually going to talk about right
sorry.
now. But sorry.
Talking about extending it lots to the east and west, so widening that.
Oh, okay, all right.
Like 3 lots into the east and west, or however many, 5. So making that a zone as well. and I think, as Andrew said, we'll be talking about the mixed-use districts next, and this is something that we talked a lot about in our subcommittee, or whatever it's called. And so maybe we can continue the conversation after they.
Yeah. Just before that, though, relatively quickly, was there feedback on ADUs, which we're going to allow in both of these districts? Anything?
Something that I just want to make sure that we're bringing up as a steering committee pointed out is that oftentimes we talk about ADUs as being on top of a garage. That prohibits some accessibility. So there's some issues of just limiting it above a garage. So looking at how is that ADU designed, and does it need to be on an accessory unit and second floor? But we would like to see more accessibility for those units, especially as they're oftentimes designated as granny flats. But
Can we just spend a second on that? Because I'm not always sure that I know the definition of an ADU. If someone did have a separate suite with a separate entrance that's attached to their home, but it could be an efficiency apartment or something. That would be an ADU as well, right?
No, if
No.
it's attached, it would not be.
I see.
It's a separate unit. It could be just a little home. It could be something above a garage.
Okay.
It could be a garage that's been converted.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Guidelines for ADU? Have different versions you can pick from.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I know that's not included as part of this project, but I could see that actually being useful.
Yep.
Given our different lot sizes and like on the east side on La Prairie, those lots there are super deep. They don't need to add an ADU to their garage. They could just put another building in their backyard and be fine and not bother anybody.
We actually talked about that in our.
Yeah. Having some creativity about and not specificity opening is to the ADU, but half on the bottom and then get into the second floor. As someone who's interested in having a smaller lot, but having space behind my garage, how do property owners, small footprints, having to come through? I don't want to create an ADU ordinance zoning and then make some owners come to merit,
So we haven't talked too much about design. I think we're working right now. Christine, who's it with? Not MEDs. Yeah, MML, on running through a couple versions of ADUs that they would people could use free of charge. So the first thing we intended to do was get feedback on them. I think the consensus we get from a lot of people is to allow them. Once we start figuring out the zone districts and everything, I think we will overlay some of those examples on existing lots, corner lots, alley lots, in the middle of block lots, and see how those function. We haven't gotten too much into design. One of the things we got into with them, though, was one of the consensus we heard from people was, I don't mind if my neighbor builds an ADU, but I don't want an investor building an ADU just to make more money. So we've talked about, we haven't gotten to that point yet, that'll be our next steering committee meeting or the one after. We talked about allowing ADUs if they do something. So if they deed restrict it to affordability, maybe that would be where you get an ADU. If it's all electric, maybe that would be an ADU. Or if it's ground floor, improving accessibility would be one of the things. But we just haven't gotten to design yet.
Because there are going to be instances too where a homeowner is experiencing issues with maintaining their home. They invest in an ADU in their backyard, they move into there and then rent out the main house. There's going to be a lot of combinations of how. want to stay in their town, they want to stay in their city. They don't necessarily need a huge house. Actually do the reverse.
So once it attaches to the home, we consider it a duplex at that point. It's just a duplex. Currently, ADUs typically are above a garage, but we would have to write the code that it could be ground floor. It would not have to be attached to a garage at all. So we would have to write in that flexibility.
Okay, now we're talking about mixed-use districts. And again, I'm Mara. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thanks for having me. And this is a working session, so we value your feedback. Please, let's mark up our copies. Thank you, Community Economic Development Director, for printing them for us. We appreciate that. So yeah, if we have any modifications in the intent statements, the boundaries of our zoning map, we have our highlighters and pens here to change them. Okay, so with that being said, we wanted to present some of the public engagement that we received so far. Andrew already touched base on this, that the key priorities that we heard regarding design in the downtown districts are adding more human scale design of buildings, like horizontal and vertical articulation. Examples of those are courtyards, stoops, awnings, canopies, stuff like that that enhance the pedestrian experience as they walk through and enjoy the downtown. We also have a top feedback on preserving our buildings and also having creative adaptive reuse of our buildings. And then a tied for third place is to encourage the development of more residential units. We specified between either ground floor or non-ground floor. We still received feedback for ground floor, but there was preference in having more residential units on the non-ground floor. And also to require more transparency. This again helps create the pedestrian experience, and more tracked buildings eliminates blank walls. Okay, so this is a little bit about the design of the downtown. Today we are focused on traditional Euclidean zoning and making sure we get our uses right. But then in the future we'll have conversations on how we want our form-based code districts to be designed. And a little pin on this, or a little teaser, form-based code is an ordinance that is guided by form. So within form, we have different strategies to regulate. So there's a transect or modified transect, a frontage, or a thoroughfare. And Ferndale has its Livernois corridor, 9-mile corridor, east and west, Woodward corridors, north and south, and also 8-mile corridors. So we are thinking in Pinecrest. I can keep going, Woodward Heights, okay, Hilton, we get it, okay. So we have our distinctions between thoroughfares, so we're gonna move forward with our, form-based code district by regulating thoroughfares, and that's why it's so important to get our uses right, so we all define our districts and understand what we want out of our thoroughfares, our streets, and what are the common uses that we'd like to see. And then within that, in the future, we'll talk about how we want our building, what types of buildings we want in each thoroughfare, what types of frontages we want, what types of building envelopes. And if you have any questions about any of those, I can get into that too. But today we're talking about use, so we're on the same page, and we know how we want to regulate and what similarities we have throughout our thoroughfares. Okay, so we have our mixed use intent statements. I have both slides here, 1 and 2. Talking about mixed-use intent statements, and then we'll verify the borders and have a more narrow discussion on the types of uses we want to regulate. And we highlighted a couple to start our conversation. But today we have our first mixed-use 1 intent statement, and this neighborhood mixed-use district provides for the development of new neighborhoods and the revitalization or extension of existing neighborhoods, which are structured upon a network of interconnected, pedestrian-oriented streets and other public spaces. The mixed-use 1 district provides for a vertical and horizontal mix of uses, typically with retail or commercial space on ground floor, office or residential uses on upper. Businesses in the MX1 district primarily serve the needs of surrounding residential neighborhood, providing convenience goods and services. The design of the building, or design of the surrounding, the design and layout of buildings support walking, biking, and create a neighborhood character that is more place-based than auto-oriented. Development in this district needs to be appropriately scaled. So this is the intent statement that our steering committee and sub-steering committee has put together. Do we have any revisions that we'd like? Thanks.
That could be a use. The asterisk probably, I would.
Thank you, Chair.
Do we need to allow for parking lots as a use, as a standalone use?
I can explain the idea, Chair. Okay, so, and thanks for your feedback. That is a good idea to add in an additional regulation so that we don't get a parking lot and then a building and then residential corridor. I understand, and we have performed that standard in other communities. The idea behind this is to allow for parking lots for businesses that do not have enough parking. I'm not sure if this is an issue within Ferndale. I can see that some parcels are smaller than others. And if we want to accommodate more parking within any of our parking sensitive areas of the city, this is a tactic that cities have used to have as a transition district between your commercial districts and your residential districts and supply parking.
Then saying that parking's on an MXC1. Of course, it's surrounding. Because to me, if you're allowing parking, there's probably a business here. I think almost contradicts.
I'm here, Chair, for any recommendations, any changes. Again, this is a working session, and our steering committee created these intent statements, and we came up with some uses. Maybe we need, if there is a parking sensitive area in the city and you guys do want to have a transitional district, maybe we create a new zone for that area and redefine it, or we remove parking from the neighborhood mixed use one.
So just a little bit from where this comes from, if you are aware or look at our existing zoning districts, we have parking districts, P1 vehicle parking, and that runs behind the commercial lots along Woodward. And this was created back in
2000s. It was a long time ago. It was when the city was looking at supporting auto-centric businesses and saying, well, we don't have enough parking on Woodward. Let's turn all the houses right along the alley into parking lots, and let's not allow those houses to ever expand or do any kind of major improvements. Right now, any of those houses are all restricted from doing anything because they're all defined as parking lots.
and so the issue is what to zone those, and so we had to talk about this quite a bit in our steering committee. So part of the issue is, and probably, I can't say this definitively, but one of the reasons we don't see a lot of redevelopment along Woodward is because so many of the lots are so small that it is hard to redevelop those properties, multi-story, without having the parking in place, even if it's, on Woodward and there's transit, multimodal, developers still want parking spaces for their residents, and oftentimes need it just to get financing. So one of the issues is, you can see how small some of these lots are. And some of the more successful lots are those that have actually acquired lots behind them and then combined and redeveloped that way. And so I think that is one solution, is that we just zone it what it is in front. And so this gets back to, so what are those lots then behind the initial Woodward fronting lot going to be zoned? And if it's more dense residential, but then if the business wants to expand and redevelop their property, but they need more space, then do we want to zone it for that purpose? Or, you know, so these are the conversations that we've had, and we kind of came up with, well, if it's this MX1, then it can be kind of like neighborhood or commercial, and that's, I guess, kind of where we landed, but certainly, or where there probably needs more discussion.
I have a question of your question.
Hmm?
How does it relate to our parking minimums, or parking maximums? If this, how might they interplay together? If we kept the parking minimum?
What we've seen at the planning commission, I mean, that's a tough theoretical question to ask, but what we've seen is that, not totally theoretical, but that oftentimes the developers aren't getting cut short by our parking minimums, and Roger, you might actually see more applications that don't come to the planning commission, but typically our parking minimums aren't preventing from development from what we see. But that might be a better question.
Are not? What did you say, are not?
Development is not being prevented by our parking minimums, typically.
Yeah, I mean, we have to allow people to use their land, so, you know, we get creative with looking at it. There's times we've had to push back and require people to do cross-parking agreements with other neighboring properties, but generally, if it's an existing use that's been there before, that's high intensity, they have a right to that lack of parking they have. So we've worked towards it. You don't see it a lot that something is just stopped in its tracks because of it.
And I think this is what Mayor Piana is asking, but so you don't often get an application for redevelopment and say, well, you need this much parking, and they say, well, that can't be done.
No, generally, we provide them our parking standards, and then we react to what they say, whether they would like a parking reduction, and we explain to them, you know, at what level would you want one, and if it's 5 or 10%, then we usually say we can probably work with that, depending on what the parameters are. So I just think generally we work with people.
And that's what I thought too. I just wanted to make sure from the city side. But is that answering your question? Is that kind of where you were going with that, or? And so if we kept with the same, I think that, you know, we would continue having the same experience. I'm not sure if we're changing, and that would be a question for Mara and Andrew.
We haven't gotten there. What we've talked about, and some cities are doing it now, is remove the emphasis on parking. Everyone gets kind of stuck up on it, and I think the parking depends on the use. One of the thoughts, and some cities are doing, is removing the parking minimum, but requiring them to provide a parking study that would be analyzed with their proposal. So we haven't gotten too far down of thinking about it. There's some hesitancy from people. That's kind of scary, but we've talked initially about that. We haven't.
And one of the, because I was one of those that I think we need to have minimums, but as I've learned more about this, investors have to get, banks will not approve investments if it can't support parking.
If they think it's not marketable.
If they think that it's not
Which
marketable,
typically
and
means
you know, so even investors look at that. So,
But it's not up to the city to decide, it's up to the market to decide on that parking. And so our parking mandates right now, minimums, mandate a certain amount of parking, which may not be in alignment with the market, but we're requiring it anyway. So, so there seems to me that this is a policy area that we need. Parking mandates drive up the cost of housing, and so I think negative consequences if we keep, more negative consequences if we keep status quo versus a more market-driven approach.
well, and Absolutely.
Well, so what, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't understand the trigger mechanism of the zoning designation that policy. And I think I had a better understanding of what could trigger it, or vice versa, right? So,
My question is, and I know a lot of these properties are behind an alley, so for instance, between Ardmore and Academy, there's an alley breaking up the dark purple from the light purple. But the other, I think the alternative is not having parking as a standalone use in MXD. Is that, okay, well then you just combine the lots. I know that we don't want to get rid of alleys because they allow for better distribution of traffic, but is there a way that we could still do that without eliminating alleys, but then say this is a combined, like we're looking at this as if it's a combined parcel with an alley, but then it's not just parking standalone from a development. Makes sense.
Yeah, isn't there a process where someone can, when they own parcels that aren't connected, they can actually apply for, I forgot what it's called.
Well, you could split lots and combine them, but where you are bisected by a public right-of-way, I don't know that we could combine it. It wouldn't, you wouldn't be able to. There's right-of-way through it.
Not true, because we've done that.
Where do we do it?
Property ownerships do that. Build an accessible alley, you can still cut through the parking lot pretty much.
Do they have to give a right of way? Is it their land, but then we require them
The
to?
alley's not their land, I mean, access.
Oh,
The alley wasn't vacant, so you go right through the parking lot
Gotcha.
as if it's an alley.
So they own both. It might,
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's necessarily combined. It's on both of them.
You could deed it together. Your deed would say lot 13 and lot 16 of something, but that's not combining them. That's just deeding them together.
You could do the same thing where it's, okay, well, I'm developing these two properties, but we require them, if they're gonna have a parking lot, that is as part of this bigger development.
I mean, I'm hearing some, I guess first, not too familiar with every zoning. This is probably limited circumstances, more related to the auto-centric uses down by South Woodward. So it's a limited area generally.
And I know it's a very unique question that we're asking, that we're getting kind of in the weeds, but I guess it goes to, I think answering that might help us of like, well, should we do this as the MX1? Should we do it as MX2? Should we do it as R2? Or like, how do we want to zone those adjacent areas?
I think the one problem with by saying if you are adjacent and bisected by a right-of-way, you can use your adjacent lot for parking, is there's a risk they buy more lots. Now you've allowed it, and now they're making a bigger parking lot down the street than you want. But
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we're all pretty much in agreement of like what we would like to see, is that we don't want to just see residential houses being torn down to build parking lots, to supplement the buildings on Woodward. Although in some cases it's probably needed for redevelopment and more greater density on those lots. So potentially if it's done well, it's integrated, and it's not at the expense of degrading the neighborhood, or like how, that's kind of how I see it. Am I hearing everyone?
Well, I think there's, I'm sorry.
I think that's what kind of, Yes, sir. Actually, what is the difference between additional use standards and special land use?
Sure, thanks. So the additional use standards would allow the Community Economic Development Department to approve the project, and then the special land use would go to Planning Commission. We would also send a notice to the public within 300 feet of the property and let them know what's going on. Also put a notice in the paper. So there's more layers of this process than just an automatic permitted use with accessory standards. And the additional standards would be something like, oh, this is only allowed for lots along Woodward, north of 9 Mile, or something like that. And then we could add in, like, if there's a development, if there's a parking lot, you can't put in another development adjacent to the parking lot. Things like this. So this conversation is helpful in creating this policy. Thank you.
So it can be intent and then specific design standards as well.
Yes.
I agree. Something that I think is really interesting, I don't know if anybody else has ever noticed, if you drive in the alley behind White Castle, this had to have happened back in the 80s, they actually acquired the lot behind it, and then they relocated the alley.
Yep, that's how it was behind Taco Bell.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, that's always a possibility if that ever comes back to the planning commission, if they want to buy the lot behind and just relocate for further development. I wouldn't support it for just a parking lot, but if they just shift the alley.
Point. We totally derailed your conversation where we're at.
Yeah.
I'm here for this. We're creating policy tonight, you guys. Okay, well, we talked about the neighborhood mixed-use district. Does anyone have any other talking points before we move into the corridor mixed-use district?
I just had one thought, actually, on the North End Ave, what's it called? To the west of the high school. I want to call it the graveyard. The storage yard, or the...
Southwest storage yard.
Yeah, that one. I think that'd be a really great place for mixed-use one. I think that additional service area, especially, and we talked a lot about on our equity and inclusion public input night about being mindful of our neighbors and about accessibility to services within the neighborhood. Sorry, to the left above Royal Oak Township.
Okay, here.
There, right there.
Thank you.
And with that lot, being a good lot to redevelop, adjacent to the school, I think that allowing for some additional types of uses there might be a good spot. And I just want to get everyone's take on that.
You're proposing MXC.
Yes.
Through the chair, I would just add, that's fine. I think it's probably going to be a PUD if it comes through. It's going to be some kind of, PUD with some affordable housing component or some kind of mixed use already.
Which would be great. I think that if we already identified as mixed use, though, and saying that we want some neighborhood service commercial there, then that just helps with the PUD process, if that's what we want. Any seconds? Any objections?
Roger was right here, and here, and here, at here.
Oh, no, yes, that one, North End. That's where the DPW had a yard there.
I have it on the screen too, if that's helpful, right here.
Oh, yeah. You can see all the way over there. I used to live over there on Pearson, a couple blocks north. I mean, it's a prime location for redevelopment, and I think that on the west side, there's already commercial, I'm forgetting the name of that road where Ernie's is. Central, so that's that dotted line on the west. So that's Central, and there's already commercial and whatnot over there.
That's Republic.
Republic, thank you.
A little bit more west. Public.
Are there any other areas, and of course, as you are able to review and digest, like Mara said, mark up and send to them, because, you know, it does take a little bit to go through the different areas, and especially since everyone lives in different neighborhoods, make sure you're looking at your neighborhood and what might be different. That's why it's really great to have everyone's eyes on this.
Recommendation for the definition. And I'm still getting my brain around the regional mixed use, auto-oriented, which I think is there, but it says transportation, the city's transportation, pedestrian access, development. I almost feel like mix one and mix two, it says modes of transportation including motor vehicle, bicycle, and walking. We have the most bus stops on Woodward, and we need to add that definition into bus infrastructure upgrades as part of the Woodward, and safety improvements. Potentially could be future investments rather than later.
Thank you.
Anything else? Were you gonna go to the commercial, or?
Yeah, Chair, so how would you like me to proceed? Do you want me to read the corridor mixed-use statement?
Oh, sorry, we didn't do that one yet.
Or did you guys have time to read it and you want me to, do you have any feedback? So this corridor mixed use accommodates commercial and other uses along the transportation major corridors to promote development that is comfortably accessible by all modes of transportation, including, we'll say, bus transportation or bus routes, motor vehicle, bicycles, and walking. Commercial uses in the MX2 district may be somewhat larger in scale, but more flexible than the MX1. While ground stories along streets are intended for commercial uses, the upper stories are designed to accommodate residential and/or office use. Sure.
So I will add, one of the conversations with the steering committee that we've had is equity and putting auto-oriented uses next to our neighbor to the south in our more low-income areas. So one of the ideas was to actually combine MXD2 and 3. So the equity was spread. 9 Mile, Hilton north of 9 Mile, all of Woodward except CBD, and 8 Mile be a combination of MXD2 and 3. Some of the MXD2, the lighter stuff, may go to MXD1. So MXD1 would be Livernois, Marshall, Hilton south of 9 Mile, Woodward Heights, and the higher intensity MXD2 would be 9 Mile, 8 Mile, Woodward, and Hilton north. So they're treated fairly. But I think we also have a concern that there's a lot of investment in Woodward. and multimodal transportation, and we'd like to steer away from more auto-intense uses. And so it for sure would have those uses being a special use review that the council could review, because there may be an appropriate location where an auto-oriented use is appropriate on Hilton or 9 Mile or 8 Mile, but overall there may not be. So I don't know if the Chair Foster wants to talk about our discussion on equity and combining those districts.
I think you explained it pretty well. With any questions on that? I would just point out that on our use matrix, the vehicle repair shop, vehicle sales, vehicle wash, etc., like those auto-centric uses that you're referring to, there's special land use in MX3. You're proposing that would go to MX2, and there would be no MX3. I just want to point out that we also then have them as permitted with additional use standards in industrial. I think that if we do that, then we'd have probably create an unwanted market shift to putting the auto-oriented uses in our industrial area. It's quite limited. And so I just want to be cautious of that. Maybe we make it a special land use in all 3 of those districts. Just want to point that out. Any questions on what Roger explained, or any?
So that would do a couple things. That would keep the kind of nomenclature the same. There's R1 and R2, MXD1 and MXD2, and I1 and I2. Keeps it pretty simple. We acknowledge CBD, Central Business District, is different, so that would be its unique class. Some of the uses, this is only in concept. We haven't reviewed fully the use chart. Some of the lower intensity MXD2 uses may go down to MXD1. We might get bifurcated a little bit. But a lot of the MXD3 would become 2, so you'd see a lot more red. But again, we probably would be a lot stricter on the uses, and even more, some more uses may become special use.
That all came out of our sub.
Yeah, we just didn't think that in one instance having workshops on equity and talking about having equity, and then saying, but all those undesirable uses are towards the south of our city. We didn't think that was a good image to have.
But we also don't want them to creep north.
We don't. That's why it would be a special use review, and we'd strengthen those standards a little bit so that they would be reviewed. City Attorney also has something to add.
If I may, I'm glad you brought the time frame up there. I wasn't sure how to compare that between 1 and 2 with that statement in it. I'm still wrapping my brain about what you suggested, and I need to ruminate on that. But I could see another suggestion, rather than the corridor regional mixed use go up Woodward north to Ardmore, from East Marshall to Ardmore. Is that what you're proposing? You proposing the regional mixed use corridor goes from purple to red, from East Marshall to Ardmore on Woodward? Is that what you propose?
Yeah, in terms of color, dark purple would turn red, and dark purple would not exist, or red would turn dark purple. Either way, they would be combined.
They'd be combined, but a lot of M2 would go into M1, and other M3 or M2s would go into M3. So you're dividing M2 between 1 and 3.
Getting rid of M2 on Woodward.
Getting rid of M2. Well, I mean, you'd include it on Woodward, and you'd include it on 8 Mile.
Yes, replacing R3, right?
Yes. And then you would put greater restriction on those items that were more car-centric.
I really had a lot of thought about this after the Tim Horton auto wash and the Caribou coffee, because East Marshall South is generally auto-centric. I don't see the car. issues. Town noise, lighting, parking, buying up single-family homes. So would it be possible to consider changing R2 at, between the one block of Woodland and West Maplehurst, because there literally is one purple of M2. And
Brad, I'm sorry.
there's two spots, the two M2 corridor mixed use on Woodward.
Next D2?
Yeah, there's a slice of purple between West Woodland and West Maplehurst. Doesn't make any sense to have that. We should consolidate there. As well as, is it possible just to make that mixed, this CDD, rather than regional mixed use? I know it has auto-centric drive-throughs, but I know what to do about those uses.
Yeah, the CBD does not match like DDA. Up a little bit more. There's no reason we couldn't finish all of Woodward up in CBD. I think we're not, what we don't have in front of us is the use chart on all the properties. So this was just a concept. We'll have to go back and work on the use chart.
Yeah, well, I think future, which may make sense and may not. But I go back to bus infrastructure and our bike lanes, and first city to convert from an auto-centric corridor with MDOT's approval of removing a lane, or creating a lane for more people. And the vision is reconstruction of wider sidewalks eventually. Like, I hope someone battles for that and goes to that on the sidewalk for it. So if we think ahead, and this is the future of our downtown, and then auto-centric places are in our downtown. And that's where I struggle as a council person, making decisions about these special land uses. Because they're, like Caribou is going to be there for 20 traffic nightmare, in my opinion, in a corridor mixed two, which is considered the DDA of the downtown. So to me, how the DDA sees itself versus downtown isn't reflective actually in the zoning here. The DDA says it's downtown, but our zoning says it's not.
I think there's two things there.
Right?
So to keep, maybe we need to separate like a drive-through. So you're talking more about drive-through as an auto-centric or any business that creates a lot of automotive traffic. But I think the intent of, I'm explaining what I just asked, and I'll go back to it, is that I think the intent of the mixed use, any of the mixed use, is that they're going to be pedestrian, scale, urban type development that is not, there's not going to be a parking lot in front or anything. It's still to that scale and to that design, but knowing that there's still sometimes a need for businesses within the city that are autocentric, since all of us drive cars. We don't want that to be heavy. So I guess what I want to kind of separate the two things is like as the intent of the district, and then maybe drive-throughs as a specific use, or are you talking more generally about making sure that I'm
I'm
understanding?
trying to reconcile the definition between M1 and M2. When I look at M1, I just see, the development of the new neighborhoods and revitalization of extension, not revitalization of existing. And M2, one could argue that
And that's why we want it,
Hortons and Subway are an extension of existing neighborhoods. So that phrase there in M1 applies to M2. And so when I start picking through what is the difference between one and two, I see very little other than, it even says intended for commercial use offices, which is what we do in M1.
Yeah.
And then both are the design layout, building support, walking, biking, and neighborhood character. Well, that is what M2 two people want as well.
Yes.
Larger, higher density. Look at the pros. Big wide sidewalks, right? Oh, so I did.
Help with the definition? Not now, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy.
with that,
Yeah.
Those are uses.
Yeah.
if I'm hearing you correctly in your mind, that's about you. Am I saying, am I picking up?
I think so. I think so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we have two good examples. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, through the chair. So I was actually surprised to see MX3 here because when we met as a subcommittee to go over some of the finer details, we had talked about only creating an MX1 and an MX2. And a lot of the things at MX2 were actually going to be in MX1, and a lot of the larger, more active things were going to be in MX2, but those were going to require special land use so that we didn't get a gas station on Oak Ridge, at Woodward, or we didn't get a car wash, at Hilton. I'm sorry, at Ardmore, and yeah. So I'm kind of a little surprised that we ended up this way because these are actually all the conversations that we had when we had the subcommittee.
I think it just got passed through. So I'm saying I have to see the use chart, and I'm seeing you were given a use chart, so you're looking off of it. Didn't see it. So,
So I just want to say, so I think we have two good examples, and I think
I can't read it now.
Commissioner Husky-Kramer has the right point, is that, so for example, we had, so the Raymond James Shepherd house that just broke ground on 9 Mile, that's an MXD2. I think it's a PUD and it's a little bit unique, but that's kind of the scale. And then the apartment building where the rehab center is on West 9 Mile by the church.
1200 West 9 Mile?
1200 West 9 Mile, that's another residential building. I think that's 5 stories. Raymond James is 5 stories. They have some mixed-use components. Like, those are the scale of the MXD2. And then we had one just recently on Livernois where it was like a 2-story mixed-use apartments and
On Alberta, it was like
Alberta.
a vacant business building,
FLAX.
like two stories.
And I think those are really great examples of, in practice, like, I think we want to keep with that. Those are the characteristics of those corridors that we want to maintain and protect. And it's really about that scale, is the two differences. And then I think what's complicated it always is, well, where do we put these uses? And that was the discussion we're having on the equity, is like, well, if we don't want these uses, but we think that we have to have them, and then we throw them, on some, corridor, then we're creating this like red light district. Not the right term, obviously. But you know what I mean, is that then we're creating this area that we don't want to create, and it's also not fair to our neighbors on the other side of that corridor. And so that's where we kind of came up with, let's make them 2 corridors, make our use standards very specific to, this is what we want, and this is what we want to achieve. We want a walkable community. We want something that's pedestrian scale, and that people feel comfortable going, from wherever they are to, another corner of the city. We want that.
I'm really applying this technology here. Except for Church's Chicken. So I kind of, I know our footprint is smaller, but if you want to have a single story drive-through, then you have to be future oriented. What could be possible? And, I was the same way when Taco Bell got repurposed. And now we have car-oriented, focused businesses at the corner of Pinecrest that is now there forever, for the next 20, 30 years, without the ability, context of the character of welcome to my neighborhood. Now it says welcome to my parking lot.
And I think that's one of the benefits of doing the form-based as well, is because if you, and for those of you who maybe aren't super familiar with the form-based code, is that you dictate the form of the building. And so if we're going to require a 2-story building that's set up to the front or the right-of-way and doesn't really allow for that single-story drive-through type building, that the form is pushing the type of the development that can go there. And then the idea is that it doesn't really matter what use is in there as long as the form meets what we want it to look like. And so the scale, the massing, all of that is what's primary versus the use.
Yes.
So if I can add, so I think we have a bunch of steering committee members here. We have people on the subcommittee. I think we hear loud and clear the concern. I won't say collectively. Me, if I could just not have any more drive-throughs or gas stations or car washes, would make it very simple. But I think we need to be careful legally about doing that. But I hear what you're saying.
Who knows what's going to happen with EV? Gas stations and EV. I'll change over to
Blind.
EV bars where you plug in for 30 minutes, but you go in and have something. I don't know. Who knows what that business concept is going to be?
So I think we have about 30 minutes left. We're probably going to run over, and we still have a lot to cover. So if you let us break that off, I think when we give you a version, it'll hopefully address those things.
I think that was a big sticking point, so I think that's a good conversation to have. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And as the zoning ordinance evolves, and we do have those cafes with EV chargers, we can also evolve our ordinance and allow those where we want them. We're getting really good at updating. And the zoning ordinance is a living document. It should be updated frequently to adjust for the community's current vision of what they want to see, and also reflect the updated master plan. Okay. So we talked about intent statements. And we also have 30 minutes left. You have a couple. Okay, Chair, what do you feel comfortable discussing? We have the intent statements for the Central Business District, a couple uses, verified borders, but it seems like as our Community Economic Development Director mentioned, we can go back to that with our steering committee. And then furthermore on the agenda, we have our industrial districts to look over, and then a zoning toolbox of how to address our Woodward Heights corridor, which I think would be a little fun discussion for us, or also nonconformities.
Like the industrial is probably self-explanatory.
No, I actually do have something I think I want to discuss about industrial, and I just want to say to, you know, not going through all the intents, I think that if you have them, and if you have language that you think that you suggest, please provide it to, you know, Roger and team or Mara and Andrew directly. I do just want to say that, and maybe we don't need to get into this here, but I think it's probably good to have the city council involved in this conversation, is one of the things that we've talked about quite often at the planning commission is about marijuana operations being in industrial districts, although they're quite, it's a retail property. And of course, when we started this and everything was fairly new and there was a lot of restrictions and what to do, but now that we've seen them, they operate much like a retail operation that's not industrial, and so this is something that we've talked about quite a bit. So I just wanted to, I noted that I think on our use table currently, they're still in industrial. It's something that the planning commission want to see. I also know that there's a lot of business regulation around that, and there's so many, but I think for future, what we've identified is the business operates much like retail. It should be in a more pedestrian-friendly zone. And so I wanted to get this.
But, I think it's, because you don't have walkable facilities. Like, I'm just, it is just, I mean, like, that would be like, what if we put cars in the middle of, industrial use? Right to bars. But it's just like, those areas are not built for humans. But I also don't want certain communities around the area, out of them and some of them out in their signage sometimes. Cut down certain corridors, like our main corridors. Folks in that's like driving down that one road that has all this. So we want to, I would like to limit that.
Can I ask the city attorney, is marijuana regulations not in zoning code, are they in another chapter? Just by a use in the zoning ordinance? I'm not familiar.
Standards. Yeah.
Okay.
Expressly limits.
Yeah, so I was going to add that. We allow 6 and we already have 6. So we don't anticipate, not that there's not a changing market and one couldn't close, but right now we're not anticipating, we can't approve another one.
getting to approval, 14-year, I agree it's changing. I think the marijuana update might need to continue on. Ordinance update because it is so, you know, that we want to have, I don't know what this
Recreational facility in our.
yeah, consumption lounges, I know, I've heard from residents, they're not interested, there's pro and cons, some want them and some don't in our downtown. Parents are upset that Buffalo, tobacco shop, Buffalo, Wild Bill's, and now the new downtown Ferndale market with all of the is troublesome for a lot of parents. So if you're trying to create not just a party downtown and an entertainment, how do you bring that, where are you going to put them in here downtown? So those have been some of the concerns that I've heard prior to consumption cafes being popularized. So those are some of the concerns that I would have if I was on council after. And some of them are acting like drive-throughs. This is a drive-through. Right?
Of the COVID thing, but that's sure it's lost by now.
But it's still operating as a drive-through, right? So I think those are some concerns. So some of them wanted to convert their second floor of their consumption, of their facility into a consumption lounge. So, like building on those corridors. So all this to say, I'm not sure you're gonna be able to, as part of the whole update, you might wanna separate this off on its own little tangent, and the next future council person as the lead on this.
And through the chair, even though I'm a total back and won't be making these decisions much longer, I will chime in that personally I would treat marijuana sales, I personally see no difference. Consumption's a little bit different. Oh, it's a strong smell. Edible consumption, I would treat it as a restaurant. But for smoking consumption, I guess I would treat it as our bar or something, with
The chair. One thing that I noticed that we don't have on here is our ordinance does allow for one lab. No one's ever applied for it, but yeah, to test the marijuana.
Oh. We had one.
Did we?
Oh, yes.
Just the testing. No, it's the testing.
And those are state definitions, they have different licenses. One other thing I wanted to mention, unless there's any further conversation on the marijuana.
Not on the marijuana, but to bring up like liquor stores, do we have liquor as a use?
So liquor stores, tattoo parlors, those sorts of, what are they called?
Nuisance related?
Nuisance related, are frequently taken out of, zoning ordinances and have been in the past 10 to 20 years. So typically you won't see, those any longer.
Marijuana,
have a
but we
hookah
don't have
lounge.
liquor stores.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, we have body art tattoo shop.
And hookah
marijuana,
lounge.
Hookah lounge.
Okay, never mind, my bad.
I don't know if we wanna just strike those or.
I was just gonna say, to bring up something else on the industrial area, just to make sure everyone knows what it means, but go ahead. Mm. Oh, gotcha.
I mean, so for example,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the one thing that's the it's flipped. On the key, it's flipped.
No.
So it's like, so I'm looking at
I was just looking at the letter. That's for the additional use standards that are reviewed by CED. And one more point, just because it's brought up in the steering, well, actually at a planning commission meeting, that the massage establishment, we talked about that being more similar to a medical office, and removing massage establishment as a separated use. But yeah, I think we can go through this separately and provide any remarks on those. Just the other one thing I wanted to point out was this Woodward Heights and Hilton overlay on Woodward Heights and Hilton. In the industrial one, the limited industrial zone, we talked about how along Woodward Heights and Hilton, we do want more of like a more pedestrian-friendly scale versus industrial. And so if there's differences between that form of the industrial and the mixed use, we wanted something that was more pedestrian-friendly. So having this overlay, and we did that versus zoning those first lots adjacent to the right-of-way, because some of those are really deep, and we want to keep those industrial, but we just wanted to make sure that how the building interacts with the right-of-way is different along those corridors versus the rest of the industrial district. So I just wanted to make sure everyone kind of understood the intent behind that. What about it?
Woodward Heights has housing on one side.
Along Hilton?
yeah. Park across the street, you got house.
That's a good point. So Hilton's south of the railroad tracks.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
It's like right
Yeah.
Across from the park?
overflow parking lot. Because of how car dealerships are parking lot for a
Yeah, I agree that we can extend that overlay.
Can I point out one thing? So we do want to be careful with that overlay, and it's not like a set to like we currently have, because the set to we have is when people want to expand, now they got to build up to the road, but it doesn't work for their business. So we just got to figure out how those industrial buildings, when they build, if they don't want to build near there, they just want addition to their building, they're not prohibited in having to build all the way up to Woodward Heights.
I think it's more about the intent of it, like more interacting and being pedestrian friendly.
And then I think it's important also to touch on the Wanda piece, if you want to touch on that.
Just the addition of the MXD or?
Yeah, along Wanda. The thought process behind that, I'm trying to find it now. Yeah.
Go ahead, Roger.
Oh. I was hoping you would take that. So the steering committee discussed also Wanda, which is, if you're familiar, you have single-family homes, generally that face the side streets, not Wanda, and then you have industrial, heavy industrial to the other side. So there was a talk of putting the MXD1 along Wanda, where if things were going to redevelop and it could face Wanda, that would be appropriate, maybe appropriate, but that goes also into Councilor Polika's concern about letting those who have residential not be prohibited from doing something, which goes into the nonconformities A and B, which Mara's going to talk about, I think.
Yeah, I think that's perfect segue, thank you.
Actually, I did have one last thing about industrial. So, on the draft map, Hilton, south of 9, on the east side of Hilton, you have Hazelhurst. On the north side of Hazelhurst, where there's residential homes that are right now, they're zoned industrial. I thought we changed those to zone them residential so that they could continue to.
I don't remember that. I do remember I know what you're saying. I do remember the nonconformity.
No, I think, are you talking,
It was just, it's right below the
You're talking
water
about-
tower.
you're talking about or Academy, not,
No, I thought it was Hazelhurst.
oh, to the east side, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just on the north side of Hazelhurst.
okay, yeah.
I don't remember this. I sort of thought the non-conforming thing would have addressed that they can still expand if they want to be residential, but if they want to switch over to industrial, that would be appropriate, but I don't remember it all. So we can,
Remember that conversation?
okay.
I think when we were looking at it, we identified that they weren't owned by a single, like, industrial landowner.
They were all individually owned.
Right.
We went through that with.
So they'd be R1.
Christina,
Nice homes. I don't see them just going away.
Christina's confirmed we talked about rezoning them, so
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Karen?
Sorry, I was just looking at another one. Yep, so if we want to talk about the non-conformities, is that next?
Yes, we had some other questions and ideas about the I-1 district, so we can maintain that conversation. As you can see in the presentation, there's a little bit more talking points, but we move into, good segue here. So if we do rezone this Hazelhurst, like East Hazelhurst on the north side, if we do rezone this area that's already residential, or sorry, that's already industrial, and we rezone it to residential, we still have an option to allow for the industrial businesses to expand their use or add an addition to their property. And that's where cities have developed a policy called a Class A or Class B nonconformities designation. So so here's our question: how do we respect established businesses when their uses are no longer permitted in the zoning ordinance that we're updating? And a lot of cities go through this challenge because their ordinances do provide or do make uses and structures outdated. So we have our answer. And all uses and structures are classified as Class B. That's how the city of Ferndale has their nonconformities today. Every use and structure is considered a Class B nonconforming use. We are proposing a Class A. And so usually cities don't want to expand or encourage the nonconforming nature of the business because they don't reflect the current policy and desires of the community. However, with the Class A policy, cities have recognized that, well, sometimes it doesn't matter if a business decides to expand or not, if they're not detrimental or creating nuisance surrounding community. So that's how we offer a Class A designation. The process for this would be the Planning Commission approves Class A designations, go through a public hearing, so residents or property owners are notified, we put the notice in the paper, and host a public hearing at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission decides if they wish to grant this Class A non-conforming use or not. So scenario, for example, is a boutique event hall in the central business district wants to expand, but boutique event halls aren't allowed. However, this use may not be considered a nuisance, and we might want to allow a bigger dance floor. So should the city have a process for this, yes or no? The yes answer is, okay, well then we'll define a Class A.
Dan, do you have any thoughts on that from a legal perspective?
Well, it's a new concept.
So, yeah, I really was pushing for this because we are making so many changes to our zone that if a business today is zoned, you know, MX1, and all of a sudden it becomes MX2, and they want to expand into something but it doesn't completely align, why are we forcing that business that we may really love, why are we forcing them out of our city or to another area of the city?
I like the intent of this. Public health safety. Why would we allow businesses? So it's like, like this needs. I like the intent. I think that's
Started as an events thing. Park, and then we added on a process, but they were concepting out a whole new business. I do think that it's flexible enough to.
Another example would be, if we were to change the marijuana facilities to be in MXD or CBD or wherever they go, and not any longer in industrial, and then they wanted to expand, they're no longer permitted in the industrial. It's a very specific use, specific district. You know, then we would have to identify, you know, Class A, Class B, and those are the types of examples that we would have to identify of, like, would we want to allow that? How would we allow that? And how are we identifying between? There's some areas where there's residential, so actually, oh, we did put those as residential. I'm looking over where Garden Fresh used to be. There's some yellow in the industrial too, and that is because there are residential houses. I thought we were going to leave those industrial.
I thought we were leaving them industrial too.
Yeah, we'll regroup on that, but if those are industrial and it is a residential property where, you know, someone lives there and they want to add on an ADU or just expand the footprint of their home, if, you know, they're zoned industrial but it's a residential use, should we allow that, should we not? And those are some very, you know, specific scenarios where we would consider this, and I think that we'll just have to have very specific standards to identify when we want to and when we don't. I think I would like to see examples from other cities, personally.
Okay. Well, I think that kind of concludes some of the information we were seeking. But I would like to give everybody a chance, if there's anything else in the zoning code that they've identified over the years that needs changing, needs updating, something that's a sticking point for them. Pardon? Mm-hmm.
Is that standard-based or is that goes back to form-based code?
Yeah, I think that's out, right? TOD overlay? Yeah, that's out. It's really been really hard.
I think we would just make our MXD to be like the TOD, yeah, or aligned with it.
Well, I've seen it help stop bad development, but that's not the best. Otherwise, we would have had
Well, and that's why the special
car
land
wash
use.
with a art gallery on top of it.
All right, moving forward. Commissioner Showalter, anything in the code that you want us to be aware of?
I've already said material that.
think we have that on the list, and it's probably starting to be incorporated in the code. But we'll look for your eye during that as well, but I think we've heard that.
And just so council's aware, a lot of the discussion that we've had at the planning commission around that is that we want to take out more of the specific language, that's because technology is always changing on building materials, and talk more about, like, we've come up with like maybe like durability or like how it lasts or sustainability, like things around, and we've had a lot of discussion, and we, I think, don't have anything that we totally agreed on, but instead of, just because there is changing, that we want to talk more about the intent versus specific materials.
What do we say when we say side, and I understand on the side of the wall. There's also it's where
Matt's an architect. So that's,
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Azar, do you have any thoughts, things to look out for? Okay, Mayor?
Having this important discussion. Our residents are asking for it. And I'm not sure how much differentiation we're going to get. Monopoly firm.
Right.
Sorry, if anybody works for them. Good. They're good. Don't get me wrong, but when you look at how are you creating from doing it all.
Yeah.
Commissioner Brazen? Councilor Elise May?
I'm looking at this, and you can tell the government, why don't we do that, or why don't we do that? Guess what caused me a little that once we do this, did we miss anything?
I think one of the things we'll be doing for a little bit is probably budgeting a little bit of money for continuing code revisions. It's impossible to catch everything because you're dealing with a city that's 95% built out, and one has a building up front, one has it on the side, one has it up here, one wants to add back here, one wants to go up, and applying the codes are really hard to existing buildings. So we're not going to catch everything. We're probably going to quickly, after adopting it, go, oh, God, this doesn't make sense. Why did we do this? And we're going to have some changes.
Who knew we would have an ice cream place that was here?
City Attorney Chris, do you have anything? I do think it's important. We have some BZA members and steering committee members and other people in the public. Does anybody have anything to add? Anybody at all? Anybody else want to add anything?
Sign permits. Things that have been up for 5 years now.
We haven't even gotten into the sign code yet, but that's one of my sore points as well. It's the sign code overall, yeah. Anybody else?
Have to maintain it. That goes.
Something, yeah. The city attorney would have to answer that. When we vacate, half goes to one, half goes to the other. Yeah.
Well, that's what I've seen in the past. And that was something I wanted.
Okay.
Use the right of way. Get onto your house when you're in. What happens to that changes it immensely.
Yeah, I think we have to take a couple of the templates that have been provided to us and overlay them on different types of lots and see where the pinch points are. And then think about, just quite frankly, if I'm going to take advantage of the zoning code, what am I going to do? I'm going to want to add on my house, but I can't, so I'm going to build an ADU and I'm going to connect it with a breezeway or Am I gonna build a garage that's 3 times the size? Maybe accessory buildings are still limited. You do have to think about ADUs of how many people are gonna take advantage of this. It's not real, I don't envision it being a lot. And so there is time to allow a couple to come in and then say, okay, this isn't working the way we want it to. But tough decisions that's why they're tough, is that some people will not, when you have a typical rectangular lot that's pretty narrow, pretty not too long, when you're used to not having people in your backyard and somebody puts an ADU and now they're walking down the driveway, it's going to cause some consternation. The tough part of it, about that. Anybody else? No? I'm trying to go around. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I see Mara writing notes, so we're doing good. Commissioner Akers.
I can say as someone who's still new to this, I like the intent statements, and I think it saves, it's come up a lot of the more difficult conversations about, like the car wash conversation that we had recently of what are we envisioning, and using that as a guidance so that we're not having all those conversations about what we thought, which has been iterated before, but just as someone who's still new to this, that is really helpful to keep everything in a straight line and not getting lost in the weeds.
Councilor Pollicott.
I just want to thank everybody for participating. Being on the steering committee has been very educational, and I appreciate everybody's input because we can't, the group is great, but it's always great to have more feedback and more ideas. So thank you.
Chair Foster. Sorry. Christine.
I asked for staff, council, any, where we could be looking. But I believe.
Mhm.
So where's the trigger point between what would be, better understanding of what.
Yeah, the site plan might be, the site plan may be an opportunity in the code. I know Christine has created a questionnaire for developers to answer some sustainability questions that we just proofed last week that we'll start providing people. But I think we haven't looked too much from that lens post our last workshop on sustainability. Councilor, Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to add that I'm
Yes, we have talked about it. I will keep you here until 9:15 to talk about it, but we can maybe write a synopsis of what our thoughts were. Commissioner Hagfors.
Yeah, from the discussion of, trying to look at our zoning. I'm looking at the ordinances. Downtown area. But every business heard on that in that development. So, which is a violation of the ordinance. So that should be addressed with all of the businesses. But expanding it outside of CBD. Every business should have an entrance that's matching their address.
Sorry, through the chair. Now that we have Andy, Officer Andy, working, should be able to push the enforcement of that.
Well, part of the issue also goes to, well, it's not only important of the layout of the business itself. Like when the yoga studio moved in, that was approved by the local. Even had emergency exit on it. And that should have never been approved. So I constantly move the row machine out.
Roger? Roger, they also never clean that shit. So we work with the
It's cleaner than anything.
we work with the DDA. See what we need to do to correct that.
I'll talk with the city attorney tomorrow about it or in the coming days. I do know we changed the rules, but I think like Pizza Hut, for example, was already built. I don't know if existing businesses we can make unless they're building a new building or what, but I'll take a look at the intent of what that was, where it is, and what is behind it.
Brain stuff in the process. Others, and so that needs to be, well, and I don't know if that's process or something.
Tropical smoothie just built. But that should have never been accepted.
But I think the build, my memory of that, because I did look into it when I first got here, was that the building was built prior to the rule coming in, and then we made the rule. I feel
I
like
think that building was.
after,
It was a building in the north side.
you and I,
The Foley building, that whole stretch is fine because it's grandfathered.
there's a reason, because I know I looked into it, it bugged me. Dan and I will talk about it in the coming days. Councilor Mikulski, any thoughts from you?
Setbacks and signage.
And in the, because we keep jumping on the intent statement, but the intent statement is just a statement. Would that have to translate into the special use, that the use you're requesting has to meet the intent? That would then be a, something measurable or to opine on? That makes sense? Is just by it being an intent statement, just the intent, means you can deny a special use review, or should that carry over and as one of the conditions of a special use granting one, it meets the intent statement? Okay. I think we should work out language in the site plan and the special use review that speaks to that as a condition of meeting the intent statement. And Commissioner Hosku. All right. Well, thank you everybody for spending. Well, I will second what some of the people speaking have said from staff and McKenna. Thank you everybody for attending, knowing that we put a lot of thought into this. We appreciate it. ZoneFerndale.com, it will be open for a while. We will send out the letters, and hopefully, if people want to direct anybody there to give feedback on sustainability, housing diversity, downtown design, or racial equity. And then with that, I'll just let the mayor close the meeting. Oh. I don't think there's anything. I'll just add the next steering committee meeting is October 10th, 2:30 to 4:30. Generally, steering committee members are invited, but anyone from the public can feel free to come on in. And we'll be going over what we found here, probably what work's been done, and then we hope to have a draft maybe in, so when would we like to have a draft? What, staff and stuff?
Well, it was all be fleshed out.
Yeah.
But a lot.
Okay, so we're working towards a draft at that meeting, and then hopefully publicly available sometime after if we can flesh out some stuff and get it in a better form. So it's moving quickly. So if we can get a quorum call.
Item Krieger Plat.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it Krieger plat item? Because we might as well just cancel it now. What is that second one? MML. That one.
Freaking down here.
Workflow.
Harder to go?